The dusty wind carried no promise of rain that September morning in 1883 when Quinn Callahan first saw her kneeling in the dirt among the rocks, her weathered hands moving with purpose across ground that looked as dead as bleached bone. He had been riding for 3 days straight from Silver City, chasing rumors of ranch work in the copper mining territory near Clifton, Arizona, and what he saw made him pull his mare to a complete stop on the rutted path that passed for a road. The woman was building something impossible in a land where even the cacti struggled to survive, arranging stones in careful rows while the relentless sun beat down on her faded calico dress and the wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. Quinn dismounted slowly, his boots sending up small clouds of dust that drifted away on the hot breeze. His throat was parched from the long ride, and his supplies had run dangerously low 2 days back when he had shared the last of his jerky with a Mexican family heading south. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of hard work, with sun-darkened skin and brown eyes that had seen too much violence for his liking. The war between the states had ended when he was just a boy, but the fighting had never really stopped out here where the law was thin and survival was the only rule that mattered. He had drifted through Texas, New Mexico, and now into Arizona territory, looking for something he could not quite name, some place where the weight of all that blood and loss might finally lift from his shoulders. The woman looked up at the sound of his approach, and Quinn felt something shift in his chest. She was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 23 or 24, with a face that spoke of determination rather than beauty, though there was something compelling in the directness of her gaze. Her eyes were gray like storm clouds, and they assessed him with neither fear nor welcome, just a calm evaluation that made him suddenly conscious of how rough he must look after days on the trail. "Water is in the bucket by the door if you are thirsty," she said without preamble, her voice carrying a slight accent he could not place immediately. Eastern, maybe, but softened by time in harder places. "I have got nothing to steal and nothing to trade, so if that is what brought you here, you may as well keep riding." Quinn touched the brim of his hat respectfully, trying not to stare at the careful lines she had created with the rocks. Up close, he could see she had been arranging them into what looked like raised beds, each one bordered by stones of varying sizes, fitted together with surprising precision. The ground inside the borders had been loosened somehow, though he could not imagine what tool she had used on earth this hard. "I am just passing through, madam, heading into Clifton to see about work, but I confess I stopped, because I have never seen anyone try to garden in country like this. Most folks would not bother with anything that was not already growing wild." He gestured at the landscape around them, the rocky hills dotted with mesquite and creosote bush, the dry riverbed cutting through the canyon bottom where only the toughest plants survived. She stood up, brushing dirt from her hands, and he could see she was taller than average for a woman, with broad shoulders and the kind of strength that came from real work rather than decoration. "Most folks give up before they even try," she said matter-of-factly. "They look at hard ground and decide it is impossible, so they never learn what might grow if you give it half a chance." Quinn found himself smiling despite his fatigue. "You sound mighty certain about that." "I am certain because I have seen it proven true more times than I can count." She walked toward the small adobe structure behind the garden plots, and he noticed she limped slightly, favoring her left leg. The building was simple but well maintained, with a wooden door and real glass in one window, which suggested she had been here long enough to make improvements. She dipped a tin cup into the bucket and handed it to him, watching as he drank deeply. The water was warm but clean, and he had rarely tasted anything better. "Thank you," he said when he had finished. "That is mighty kind. Name is Quinn Callahan. Willow Zimmerman." She took the cup back and refilled it for herself. "And kindness has got nothing to do with it. Water is free out here when you can find it. No point in being stingy with the one thing we have got in reasonable supply, at least when the river is running." He glanced back at the garden plots, curiosity overcoming his usual reserve. "How do you plan on getting things to grow in this heat? Even with water, the sun will scorch most plants before they put down roots." Willow smiled then, just a slight curve of her lips, but it transformed her face entirely. Life finds a way if you let it, she said. You just have to pay attention to what it needs and stop trying to force it into being something it is not meant to be. I am not planning on growing corn or wheat out here, but there are plenty of plants that thrive in heat and poor soil. You just have to know which ones and how to give them the conditions they need. Quinn tied his horse to the rail post and walked back to the plots, studying them with new interest. Now that he looked closer, he could see she had angled some of them to catch more shade from the house, and others were positioned where water would naturally collect if rain ever fell. The rock borders were not just decorative, they would hold heat through the cold desert nights and provide shelter from wind. It was clever work, the kind that came from real observation rather than book learning. Where did you learn to do this? He asked. Her expression shuddered slightly, some of the openness fading. Different places. My parents were missionaries. We traveled a lot before they died. I picked up things along the way, watching what grew where and asking questions of folks who knew the land. She changed the subject quickly. If you are looking for work in Clifton, you should know the copper mines are hiring, but it is brutal labor and the pay is poor. Better to look for ranch work if you can ride. I can ride, rope, and handle most anything that needs doing on a ranch, Quinn confirmed. That is what I have been doing since I was 14 years old. Worked cattle drives up from Texas, worked ranches in New Mexico, just drifting mostly, looking for decent work with decent people. That is a rare combination out here, Willow observed. She studied him for a long moment, then seemed to come to some internal decision. I do not suppose you know anything about building, do you? I need to extend my collection system for rainwater before monsoon season hits, but I cannot manage the heavy work with my leg the way it is. Quinn looked at her leg, then quickly away, not wanting to seem rude. What happened, if you do not mind my asking? Horse threw me last spring, broke in 2 places. I set it myself as best I could, but it did not heal quite right. Still works, just not as well as it used to. She said it without self-pity, just stating facts. I can offer you meals and a place to sleep for a few days if you will help me finish the water system. I know it is not much, but it is what I have got to trade. He should have said no and kept writing. He needed real paying work, not charity meals from a woman who clearly had little enough for herself. But something about her calm competence and the impossible garden she was coaxing from stone made him want to stay, at least for a little while. Besides, the thought of sleeping under a roof instead of the open sky held considerable appeal after so many nights on the trail. That seems like a fair trade, he said. I will stay a few days and help you build whatever you need. Cannot promise I am any kind of expert, but I know my way around hammer and nails well enough. Willow nodded, apparently unsurprised by his acceptance. Good. You can put your horse in the lean-to around back. There is some hay left from my own mare, and the trough has got water. I will get supper started. Quinn led his mare around the adobe house and found the lean-to she had mentioned, a simple 3-sided structure that nonetheless offered good shelter from the elements. Willow's horse was a sturdy-looking bay with intelligent eyes who nickered softly at the newcomer. He unsaddled his own mount and rubbed her down properly before making sure she had feed and water. His father had beaten the importance of caring for your animals into him early, one of the few useful things the old man had done before drinking himself to death. When he returned to the front of the house, Willow had gone inside, and he could see lamplight glowing in the window, though the sun had not yet set. He knocked on the door frame, and she called for him to enter. The interior was sparse but clean, with a cooking area in one corner, a rope bed covered with rough blankets in another, and a table with 2 mismatched chairs in the center. Shelves on the wall held a few books, some jars of preserved food, and what looked like packets of seeds carefully labeled in neat handwriting. You can sleep in the lean-to with the horses, Willow said as she worked at the stove, stirring something in a pot that smelled of beans and chilies. I have got some extra blankets that are decent enough, and it is better than sleeping on the ground. I have slept in worse places, Quinn assured her. He felt awkward standing in the small space, too large and male in this woman's carefully ordered domain. Is there anything I can do to help? You can sit down and stop hovering like you are afraid you might break something. I am making beans with salt pork and some wild onions I found growing by the river. It is not fancy, but it will fill your belly. Quinn sat at the table and watched her move around the small kitchen area with the efficiency of long practice. She had removed her hat, and he could see her hair was a light brown color, streaked with blonde from the sun, and pulled back in a simple braid that hung past her shoulder blades. There were calluses on her hands and dirt still under her fingernails despite the washing she had given them. Everything about her spoke of hard work and harder choices, and he found himself wanting to know her story even as he suspected she would not easily share it. They ate in companionable silence, the beans rich with fat and spices that reminded him of his time in Texas. When they had finished, Willow poured coffee from a pot she had kept warm on the stove, and they sat together at the table while twilight deepened outside and the temperature finally began to drop from the day's brutal heat. Tell me about this water collection system you need built, Quinn said, cradling the warm cup in his hands. Willow got up and retrieved a piece of paper from the shelf, bringing it to the table. He was surprised to see she had drawn careful plans with measurements and notes about materials. The design showed a series of channels and cisterns that would catch rainwater from the roof and direct it into storage containers that could then be used for irrigation. I got the basic structure in place last year, but I need to expand it to catch more water and build better storage. The monsoons come in July and August usually, sometimes into September, and that is the only reliable moisture we get besides what I can carry up from the river. If I can capture enough during the rains, I can keep the garden going through the dry months. This is good planning, Quinn said, genuinely impressed. You drew this yourself? I did. Like I said, I have been watching and learning my whole life. My father used to say I had an engineer's mind in a woman's body, and he meant it as a compliment, even if most folks would not take it that way. I would take it as a compliment, Quinn said. Too many people mistake lack of opportunity for lack of ability. I have known plenty of men who could not plan their way out of a burlap sack, and more than a few women who could run circles around them if anyone bothered to let them try. Willow looked at him with something that might have been approval. You do not talk like most cowboys I have met. I read when I can, he admitted. My mother taught me before she passed, and I have kept it up best as I am able. Books are hard to come by when you are drifting, but I pick them up when I find them and read until they fall apart. What do you read? Anything, really. Novels, newspapers, even agricultural manuals, if that is all there is. Knowledge is knowledge. Seems foolish to turn down any chance to learn something new. They talked long into the evening, longer than Quinn had talked to anyone in months. He learned that Willow had been in Arizona Territory for 2 years, having come west after her parents died of fever in Oklahoma. She had worked as a cook and cleaner in mining camps, saving every penny until she had enough to file a homestead claim on this 160 acres of Rocky Canyon land that no one else wanted. The government was practically giving away land to anyone willing to prove it up, and she had seized the opportunity, even though everyone told her she was crazy to try it alone. They said a woman by herself would not last 6 months out here, she said with quiet satisfaction. That was 2 years ago. I am still here, and I will still be here 20 years from now if I have got anything to say about it. Quinn believed her. There was something unbreakable in Willow Zimmerman, a core of determination that reminded him of the ancient rocks that formed the bones of this land. She had decided to survive and thrive in this harsh place, and he suspected she would do exactly that through sheer force of will and careful planning. When the conversation finally wound down, Quinn excused himself and made his way to the lean-to, where Willow had already laid out blankets for him. He arranged them into a decent bedroll and lay down, staring up at the stars visible through the open side of the shelter. His mind kept returning to the image of Willow on her knees in the dirt, building something from nothing refusing to accept that the land was too hard or the conditions too harsh. Life finds a way if you let it, she had said, and he wondered if that philosophy applied to more than just plants struggling in poor soil. The next morning dawned clear and hot, and Quinn was up with the sun, years of ranch work having trained his body to wake early. He found Willow already outside, checking on her garden plots and sprinkling water from a bucket onto the loosened soil. She had changed into different clothes, another simple dress, but this one with the skirt pinned up to allow easier movement, revealing practical boots that had seen better days. "There is coffee and cornbread inside," she said when she noticed him. "Help yourself, and then we can get started on the water system." They worked through the morning as the temperature climbed, Quinn following Willow's careful instructions as they built channels from scrap metal and wood. She had accumulated materials slowly over time, trading for some pieces and salvaging others from abandoned claims and mining operations. Her leg clearly pained her, especially when she had to climb or bend, but she never complained, just found different ways to accomplish what needed doing. Quinn found himself watching her when he should have been focused on his work, noticing the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating, or how she pushed stray wisps of hair back from her face with the back of her hand to avoid getting dirt on her forehead. There was no pretense about her, no attempt to be anything other than what she was. In a world where so many people wore masks and played roles, her honesty was refreshing. Around noon, they took a break in the shade of the house, and Willow brought out bread and cheese, along with more of the water that tasted faintly of minerals from the canyon rock. "You are good at this," she observed, nodding toward the work they had completed. "Better than good, actually. You have got an eye for how things fit together." "Spent a few years working construction in Santa Fe before I went back to ranch work," Quinn explained. "Learned a lot from a carpenter there who was patient enough to teach me properly. He said measuring twice and cutting once saved more time and material than any other rule he could give me." "Smart man." Willow chewed thoughtfully on a piece of cheese. "Can I ask you something personal?" Quinn tensed slightly but nodded. "You can ask. Cannot promise I will answer, but you can ask. Why are you drifting? A man with your skills could settle somewhere, build something for himself instead of always working for other people. You do not seem like the type who is running from the law or from responsibilities." It was a fair question, and Quinn found himself wanting to give her an honest answer. "I do not rightly know anymore," he admitted. "I started drifting after my father died because there was nothing keeping me in one place, and I wanted to see what else was out there beyond the little corner of Texas where I grew up. Then it just became habit, I suppose. Every time I thought about settling, something would happen. The ranch would change hands, or the owner would turn out to be a bastard, or I would just get restless again. I keep thinking I will know the right place when I find it, but so far nowhere has felt like home." "Maybe you are looking for the wrong thing," Willow suggested. "Maybe home is not a place you find, but something you build, like my garden. You have got to put down roots, even when the ground is hard, and trust that they will hold if you take proper care of them." Her words stayed with him as they returned to work, laboring through the afternoon heat until the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. By the time they stopped for the day, they had completed a significant portion of the expansion, and Quinn could see how the system would work once it was finished. It was clever engineering, using gravity and natural drainage patterns to move water where it was needed with minimal effort. Over the next several days, they fell into a comfortable rhythm. Quinn would wake early and tend to the horses, then help Willow with whatever projects she had planned for the day. Sometimes it was work on the water system. Other times it was hauling rocks for new garden beds or repairing the adobe walls where the weather had worn them down. In the evenings, they would eat together and talk, and Quinn found himself sharing stories he had not told anyone in years, things about his childhood and his parents, and the dreams he had carried before life taught him to lower his expectations. Willow shared her own stories more slowly, parceling them out like precious water in a drought. He learned that her parents had been strict but loving, that they had taught her to see all people as equal before God, even when that belief made them unpopular in the various communities where they preached. She had learned about plants and agriculture from tribal peoples in Oklahoma and from Mexican farmers who had been working difficult land for generations. When her parents died, she had been 21 years old, with nothing but the knowledge they had given her and a fierce determination to make something of herself on her own terms. I got tired of being told what a woman could and could not do, she said one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of orange and red. Tired of people looking at me with pity or disdain because I did not have a husband or family to define me. Out here, none of that matters. The land does not care if you are male or female, white or brown, educated or ignorant. It only cares if you are willing to work hard enough and smart enough to make something grow. Quinn understood that on a level deeper than words. He had spent his whole life being told he was just a drifter, just a hired hand, someone without prospects or future. But out here, working alongside Willow to build something real, he felt more purposeful than he had in years. His hands remembered skills he had nearly forgotten, and his mind engaged with problems that mattered in immediate and tangible ways. On the fifth day, a rider approached just after dawn. Quinn saw him coming from a distance and instinctively moved to where his gun belt hung on a nail in the lean-to, though he did not strap it on yet. Willow emerged from the house and stood watching the approaching horseman with her hand shading her eyes, her expression neutral but alert. The rider turned out to be an older man, maybe 50, with the weathered look of someone who had spent decades under the desert sun. He rode well despite his age, and his horse was better quality than most working cowboys could afford. When he dismounted, he removed his hat politely and nodded to both of them. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, "I hope I am not intruding. Name is Henry Dawson. I run the Broken Arrow Ranch about 10 miles south of here." "Mr. Dawson," Willow acknowledged. "What brings you out this way?" "Well, I have been hearing interesting things about what you are doing out here, and I wanted to see it for myself. Hope you do not mind." His eyes traveled over the garden plots and the water collection system, clear appreciation showing in his expression. "I will be damned. Pardon my language, madam, but this is something to see. How are you getting things to grow in this ground?" Willow explained her methods while Quinn hung back, watching the interaction carefully. Dawson seemed genuine in his interest, asking intelligent questions and listening attentively to the answers. When Willow mentioned she was planning to start with herbs and native plants before trying vegetables, he nodded enthusiastically. "That is smart thinking. Work with the land instead of against it." He glanced at Quinn then. "You must be the hired hand folks mentioned seeing out here." "Just helping out for a few days," Quinn said evenly. "Quinn Callahan. Henry Dawson." They shook hands, and Dawson's grip was firm, but not challenging. "Any chance you are looking for steady work? I am always needing good hands at the Broken Arrow, and if you are clever enough to help Miss Zimmerman build all this, you would be valuable to have around." It was a generous offer, exactly the kind of opportunity Quinn had been seeking when he first rode into this country. Steady work, decent pay, a place to stay. But to his surprise, he found himself hesitating, his eyes moving to Willow, who was carefully not looking at him, her attention focused on adjusting rocks in one of the garden beds. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Dawson, but I have got a few more days of work to finish here first. Once that is done, maybe we can talk about it." Dawson nodded amiably. "Fair enough. Offer stands whenever you are ready." He turned back to Willow. "Miss Zimmerman, I meant what I said about being impressed with your work here. If you ever need anything, supplies or help, or just a neighborly hand, you send word to the Broken Arrow. Not many folks tough enough or smart enough to make a go of it out here alone, and I respect the hell out of what you are doing." "Pardon my language again." Willow smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. That means more than you might think." After Dawson had ridden away, Willow and Quinn returned to work without discussing the job offer, but it hung in the air between them like summer heat, impossible to ignore. Quinn found his thoughts circling back to it throughout the day, weighing the practical benefits against the strange reluctance he felt about leaving this place. He had only known Willow for 5 days, but somehow it felt like longer, like they had been working side by side for months instead of less than a week. That evening, as they sat on the rough wooden bench Willow had built outside her door, she finally broke the silence on the subject. "You should take Mr. Dawson's offer," she said quietly. "It is exactly what you were looking for when you came through here. Steady work, good pay. He runs an honest operation, from what I have heard, treats his people fairly." "I know I should," Quinn agreed. But he made no move to leave, and Willow did not push the issue further. The next day, they finished the water collection system, and Quinn stood back to admire their work with genuine pride. It was well built and would serve Willow's purposes perfectly, catching every drop of rain that fell on her roof and channeling it into storage for the long, dry months. She tested it by pouring buckets of water onto the roof, and they watched with satisfaction as the liquid flowed exactly where it was supposed to go, filling the cisterns without waste or overflow. "It is perfect," Willow said, and there was something in her voice beyond simple satisfaction. "Thank you, Quinn. This is going to make all the difference for the garden. I could not have done it without your help." "Yes, you could have," Quinn said honestly. "It would have taken you longer and been harder with your leg bothering you, but you would have figured it out. You do not need anyone to make this place work." "No," Willow agreed, "but it is nicer not being alone while doing it." They stood there in the afternoon sun, close enough that Quinn could see the flecks of blue in her gray eyes, and he felt something shift between them, something that had been building since that first morning when he had stopped to watch her building gardens from rock. He wanted to reach out and touch her face, wanted to pull her close and find out if she felt this same strange pull that had been growing in his chest, but he hesitated, unsure if his feelings were welcome or if he was reading more into her kindness than she intended. Willow solved the problem by stepping closer and taking his hand, her rough fingers interlacing with his. "I am not good at games or pretending," she said, looking up at him steadily. "So I am just going to say this straight. I like you, Quinn Callahan. I like how you think and how you work and how you talk to me like I have got a brain in my head worth listening to. These past few days have been the best I have had since I came to this territory, and the thought of you leaving makes me feel empty in a way I did not expect." Quinn's heart hammered in his chest. "I feel the same way," he admitted. "I should take Dawson's offer and move on like I always do, but the thought of not seeing you again makes me want to stay even though I know I should not impose on your hospitality any longer." "What if it was not imposing?" Willow asked. "What if I wanted you to stay? Not just for a few more days, but for as long as you were willing. I could use help building this place up, and I think maybe you could use a place that felt like home. We could be partners in this, sharing the work and the rewards." It was a bold offer, the kind of thing that would raise eyebrows and start tongues wagging in town if anyone found out. An unmarried man and woman living on the same claim would be considered scandalous at best, sinful at worst. But Quinn found he did not care what other people thought. Willow was offering him exactly what he had been searching for without knowing it: a place to belong and a person to build something with. "I would like that," he said, "more than I can properly say. But I need to be honest with you about something first. I am not a man with prospects, Willow. I have got my horse, my saddle, my guns, and about $40 to my name. If you are hoping I will provide for you or make your life easier, I do not know that I can promise that beyond hard work and honest dealing." Willow laughed, a sound of genuine amusement. "Quinn, I am a woman alone on a hardscrabble homestead, trying to grow gardens in rock soil. Do I look like someone who is looking for an easy life or a man with money? I want a partner, not a provider. Someone who will work beside me and respect what I am trying to build here. Everything else we will figure out as we go." He kissed her then, unable to resist any longer, and she kissed him back with a warmth that belied her practical nature. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers and felt something in his chest settle into place, like a broken bone finally healing properly. I am going to need to ride into Clifton and get my things from where I left them stabled, he said. And I should probably talk to Dawson, let him know I am not taking the job because I have got other plans. We can both go, Willow suggested. I need to pick up some supplies anyway, and it will be good for people to see us together if we are going to be partners. Might as well face down the gossip head on rather than letting it build up behind our backs. They rode into Clifton the next morning, Quinn on his mare and Willow on her bay gelding, moving at an easy pace that accommodated her healing leg. The town was larger than Quinn had expected, swollen with miners and their families drawn by the copper deposits that ran rich through these mountains. The main street was a chaos of activity, with freight wagons hauling ore, merchants hawking their wares, and men standing in clusters outside saloons, even though it was barely noon. Willow handled the stares and whispers with admirable composure, riding straight back through town to the general store where she conducted her business with quiet efficiency. Quinn retrieved his few belongings from the livery stable and paid his bill, then joined Willow for the supplies she was purchasing. The store owner, a balding man named Peterson, was polite but curious, his eyes moving between them speculatively. Here you have been helping Miss Zimmerman out at her place, Peterson said to Quinn as he wrapped their purchases in brown paper. That is right, Quinn confirmed, meeting the man's gaze steadily. Going to be staying on as her partner, helping to build up the claim. Peterson's eyebrows rose fractionally, but he was smart enough not to say whatever he was thinking. Well, good luck to you both. Not many folks willing to take on land that difficult. Takes particular kinds of people to make something out of nothing. They were leaving the store when Quinn spotted Henry Dawson coming out of the bank across the street. The rancher saw them at the same moment and changed direction to meet them on the boardwalk, tipping his hat to Willow. Miss Zimmerman, Callahan, good to see you both in town. His eyes took in their proximity and the supplies they were carrying together, and understanding dawned in his expression. I suppose this means you have made your decision about that job offer. I have, Mr. Dawson, and I appreciate you thinking of me, but I have decided to partner up with Miss Zimmerman on her homestead claim, going to help her build it up proper. Dawson smiled, looking genuinely pleased rather than disappointed. Cannot say I am surprised. You two had a certain look about you even when I came by the other day. Well, the offer stands if things do not work out, but I suspect they will. You strike me as people who know what you want once you find it. He touched his hat brim again. Miss Zimmerman, you have got yourself a good man there if he works half as hard as I think he does. I know it, Willow said simply, and Quinn felt warmth spread through his chest at the confidence in her voice. They rode back to the homestead with their supplies, arriving as the sun began its descent toward evening. Quinn helped Willow unload everything. Then they worked together to prepare supper, moving around each other in the small space with an ease that surprised them both. It felt natural having Quinn there, like he had always been part of this place, even though less than a week had passed since his arrival. After they ate, Quinn retrieved his bedroll from the lean-to and looked at it for a long moment before leaving it there. They had not discussed sleeping arrangements beyond the initial offer of the lean-to, and he did not want to presume anything despite their kiss and declared partnership. But when he returned to the house, Willow was making up a second pallet on the floor near the stove, laying out blankets with the same methodical care she brought to all her tasks. I figure we will need to build you proper sleeping quarters eventually, she said without looking up. Maybe extend the house or put up a second structure. But for now, this will have to do. I am not ready for anything more than that yet, Quinn, if that is all right with you. I like you, more than like you, but I need time. That is more than all right, Quinn assured her. We have got all the time in the world, Willow. There is no rush for anything. They settled into life together with surprising ease over the following weeks. Quinn threw himself into the work of improving the homestead with the enthusiasm of a man who finally had something worth working for. They built additional garden beds, each one carefully positioned and constructed to maximize the limited water supply. They repaired fences and improved the lean-to into a proper small barn. They hauled rock and adobe and wood until both their backs ached, and their hands were covered in fresh calluses. In the evenings, they would sit together and plan the future, Willow's sketches and notes spreading across the table as they discussed what to plant and when, where to add new structures, how to make the homestead more productive and self-sufficient. Quinn found he had ideas too, suggestions born from years of working different kinds of land and seeing different approaches to the challenges of frontier life. Willow listened to all of them seriously, adopting some and explaining why others would not work in this specific location with its particular conditions. The monsoon rains came in late July, and they stood together under the ramada Quinn had built, watching in satisfaction as their water collection system performed exactly as designed, capturing every precious drop and directing it into storage. The garden beds filled with water that soaked into the carefully prepared soil, and within days the first green shoots began emerging from seeds Willow had planted weeks earlier. "I told you," she said, her face radiant with joy as she knelt beside the new growth, touching the tender leaves with gentle fingers. "Life finds a way if you let it. You just have to give it what it needs and trust that it knows how to do the rest." Quinn watched her in the soft morning light and felt something fierce and protective rise in his chest. He loved this woman, he realized, loved her determination and her wisdom and the way she saw potential where others saw only barren rock. He loved how she challenged him and taught him and made him want to be better than he had thought he could be. He told her so that evening, the words coming easier than he had expected. "I love you, Willow Zimmerman. I think I have loved you since I first saw you building gardens from stone and refusing to accept that anything was impossible." Willow set down the cup she had been holding and looked at him with those storm gray eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "I love you too, Quinn Callahan. I did not expect to, did not even think I wanted to, but you showed up when I needed someone and you have stayed for all the right reasons. Not because you wanted something from me, but because you wanted to build something with me." She stood up and held out her hand, and when Quinn took it, she led him to her bed, where they came together with a tenderness that surprised them both. They were careful with each other, learning the landscape of each other's bodies the same way they had learned the landscape of this difficult land, paying attention to what worked and what did not, communicating with touches and whispered words. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the narrow bed, and Quinn felt more at peace than he could remember being in his entire life. As summer faded into fall, the garden flourished beyond even Willow's optimistic projections. The herbs came in strong, filling the air with the scent of sage and oregano. The vegetables she had chosen specifically for heat tolerance produced steadily, providing fresh food for their table and extra to preserve for winter. Word of Willow's success began spreading through the territory, and people started coming by to see what she had accomplished and to ask advice about their own struggling crops. Willow shared her knowledge freely, teaching anyone who asked about soil preparation and water conservation and working with native plants instead of fighting them. Quinn watched with pride as she patiently explained her methods to weathered ranchers and young homesteaders alike, never making anyone feel stupid for not knowing what she had spent years learning. In October, Quinn rode into Clifton and returned with the local minister, a practical man named Reverend Shaw, who agreed to marry them in a simple ceremony under the ramada, with only the sky and the land as witnesses. Willow wore her best dress, which was still worn and faded but clean, and Quinn had trimmed his beard and borrowed a decent jacket from Henry Dawson, who had become a good friend and regular visitor to the homestead. "Do you, Quinn Callahan, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Quinn said firmly, looking into Willow's eyes and seeing his entire future there. "And do you, Willow Zimmerman, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" "I do," Willow said, her voice steady and sure. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Quinn did, thoroughly, and without self-consciousness, And when he pulled back, Willow was smiling in a way that made his heart feel too large for his chest. They celebrated with a simple dinner that Henry Dawson and a few other neighbors attended, and it was perfect in its simplicity. Just people who respected their hard work and wished them well. That winter was hard, with temperatures dropping below freezing at night and a dusting of snow that shocked Quinn with its incongruity in this desert landscape. But they had prepared well, with stores of food and firewood and improvements to the house that kept out the worst of the cold. They spent long evenings by the fire, Quinn reading aloud from books while Willow mended clothes or worked on plans for the next planting season. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their future, building the foundation of their life together with words and trust. In the spring, Willow discovered she was pregnant. She told Quinn one evening in March as they worked together in the garden, planting seeds for the new season, and he stood there with dirt on his hands and tears in his eyes, unable to quite believe that this was real, that he had somehow stumbled into a life this good. "Are you happy about it?" Willow asked, her expression uncertain. "I know we did not exactly plan this, and bringing a child into this hard country is not easy." "I am happier than I have any right to be," Quinn told her honestly. He pulled her close, mindful of her stomach even though it was still flat, and held her in the fading light. "We will figure it out, just like we figure everything else out, together." The pregnancy progressed well, despite the hard work Willow insisted on continuing. Quinn tried to take on more of the physical labor, but she refused to be treated like she was fragile, insisting that women had been having babies while working for thousands of years, and she did not plan on being any different. They did compromise on certain things, with Quinn handling the heaviest lifting and Willow focusing on tasks that required less physical strain. In November of 1884, on a crisp morning when the sky was impossibly blue and clear, Willow went into labor. Quinn rode into Clifton to fetch the midwife, a capable Mexican woman named Senora Reyes, who had delivered half the babies in the territory. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night, and Quinn paced outside the house like a caged animal, jumping at every sound from within. Finally, just before dawn, he heard the sharp cry of an infant, and Senora Reyes emerged with a tired but triumphant smile. "You have a son, Senor Callahan, strong and healthy, with good lungs. Your wife did very well." Quinn rushed inside to find Willow propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in clean blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face that to Quinn looked absolutely perfect. "Meet your son," Willow said softly, and Quinn sat carefully on the edge of the bed, hardly daring to breathe as he looked at the life they had created together. "He is beautiful," Quinn managed, his voice rough with emotion. "You are incredible. I do not even know what to say." "Say you are going to help me with all those midnight feedings," Willow suggested with a tired laugh. "This boy is going to keep us busy." They named him James, after Quinn's grandfather, who had been the one decent man in his family history. James Callahan grew fast and strong, thriving despite the harsh conditions. Quinn built a cradle from carefully chosen wood, and Willow sewed blankets and clothes, both of them marveling at how something so small could fill their lives so completely. The homestead continued to prosper over the following years. The garden expanded as they proved up more of their land and developed new techniques for dry farming. Quinn proved to have an aptitude for animal husbandry, and they acquired chickens and goats that adapted well to the climate. They built a proper second room onto the house to give James his own space as he grew, then added a third room for what they hoped would be future children. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, was born in the spring of 1887. She had Willow's gray eyes and Quinn's easy smile, and from the moment she could crawl, she was following her older brother around and getting into everything. James took his role as big brother seriously, always watching out for his little sister and showing her the things Quinn and Willow taught him about the land and the plants and the animals. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when the rains failed and the garden struggled despite all their careful planning. There were times when illness swept through the territory and they huddled in their home, praying it would pass them by. Quinn still sometimes had nightmares about the violence he had witnessed in his younger years, waking up in a cold sweat until Willow's arms around him reminded him where he was and who he had become. But the good times far outweighed the hard ones. They became known throughout the territory as the couple who could make anything grow, and people came from miles around seeking Willow's advice. Quinn took on occasional work for neighboring ranches when they needed an extra hand, earning money that allowed them to make additional improvements and buy things they could not produce themselves. Their children grew healthy and strong, learning to read from the books Quinn and Willow treasured and learning to work from the daily demands of homestead life. In 1890, when James was 6 and Sarah was 3, Willow announced she was pregnant again. This time Quinn did not worry quite as much, having been through it twice before, though he still fretted and fussed until Willow threatened to make him sleep in the barn if he did not calm down. Their third child, another son they named Thomas, arrived during a summer thunderstorm that seemed fitting for the robust, loud infant who announced his presence with impressive determination. As the children grew, Quinn taught them everything he knew about horses and cattle and hard work. Willow taught them about plants and soil and how to read the subtle signs of the land. They both taught them about kindness and fairness and the importance of seeing people for who they were rather than what society said they should be. The Callahan homestead became known as a place where everyone was welcome, regardless of their background, where Mexican farmers traded knowledge with white ranchers, where Apache families passing through could stop for water and supplies without fear of violence. This openness occasionally brought criticism from those who thought mixing with different peoples was improper or dangerous. But Quinn and Willow had learned long ago to care more about doing right than about what narrow-minded people thought. They taught their children that all people deserved respect and that the color of someone's skin or their native language said nothing about the content of their character. The years flowed one into another like water through Willow's carefully built channels, each season bringing its own challenges and rewards. Quinn's hair started showing gray at the temples, and Willow developed smile lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the Arizona sun. Their children grew tall and capable, each developing their own interests and talents while remaining firmly rooted in the values their parents had instilled. James showed an aptitude for engineering that reminded Quinn of Willow's methodical mind. By the time he was 12, he was sketching designs for improved irrigation systems and better ways to capture and store water. Sarah proved to have a gift for working with animals, able to gentle even the most skittish horse with patience and understanding. Thomas was still young, but already showed signs of being a natural farmer like his mother, fascinated by seeds and plants and the magic of growth. In the summer of 1895, on a day very much like the one when Quinn had first ridden up to find Willow, building gardens from rock, they stood together looking out over all they had created. The once barren land was now green with productive plants. The simple adobe house had grown into a proper homestead with multiple buildings and corrals. Their children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Willow asked, leaning against Quinn's side. They were both in their late 30s now, no longer young, but not yet old, weathered by sun and wind, but strong from constant work. Taking a chance on a stubborn woman with a crazy dream and a piece of land nobody else wanted? Quinn wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Not for a single moment. You were right about what you said that first day. Life finds a way if you let it. You just have to be willing to put in the work and trust that something beautiful can grow even in the hardest places. We have built something good here," Willow said with quiet satisfaction. "Not just the homestead, but a real home, a place where our children can grow up knowing they are loved and that hard work and determination can overcome just about anything." "We have," Quinn agreed, "and we are not finished yet. There is always more to build, more to improve, more to learn." That evening, as they sat around the dinner table with their 3 children, Quinn looked at each face in turn and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. He thought about the lost young man he had been 12 years earlier, drifting without purpose or hope, convinced that home was something other people had but he never would. He thought about how close he had come to just riding past that September morning, too focused on his own problems to stop and investigate what one determined woman was doing with rocks and impossible dreams. Papa, you are staring, Sarah observed with the frank honesty of a 7-year-old. Is something wrong? Nothing is wrong, sweetheart, Quinn assured her. I am just thinking about how lucky I am to have all of you. You are not lucky. You are smart, James corrected, with the certainty of an 11-year-old who thought he knew everything. You were smart enough to stop and help Mama when she needed it, and she was smart enough to let you stay. That is not luck. That is making good choices. Willow caught Quinn's eye across the table, and they shared a smile that held 12 years of shared struggles and shared triumphs, of learning to trust and build and grow together. Their children went back to their dinner, oblivious to the profound moment passing between their parents, and that was exactly as it should be. They would learn someday, when they were older, about the power of taking chances on impossible things and the beauty that could bloom in the most unlikely places. As the years continued to pass, the Callahan family became an institution in the Clifton area. Their methods for dry farming and water conservation were adopted by other homesteaders and ranchers, helping to transform the harsh landscape into productive land that supported growing communities. Willow wrote a series of articles for agricultural journals about her techniques, and people from as far away as California and Texas wrote asking for advice. Quinn became known as one of the most reliable workers in the territory, the kind of man who could fix anything and who approached every task with careful thought and skill. But he never went back to drifting, never felt that restless urge that had driven him for so many years before he met Willow. The homestead was his anchor, and his family was his purpose, and that was more than enough. In 1898, Arizona Territory began agitating for statehood, and there was much talk about progress and modernization. The railroad had come through Clifton several years earlier, bringing new people and new opportunities. The world was changing, becoming more connected and faster paced. But on the Callahan homestead, life continued at its own rhythm, governed by the seasons and the work that needed doing, and the steady, reliable love that Quinn and Willow had built together. James left home in 1899 at 17 to study engineering in Tucson, promising to come back and apply what he learned to help develop better water systems for the whole territory. Sarah stayed close to home, working with horses and eventually starting a breeding program that produced some of the finest working horses in Arizona. Thomas proved to have inherited his mother's green thumb and his father's patience, taking over more and more of the garden work as Willow's old leg injury began bothering her more with age. Quinn and Willow aged together gracefully, their love deepening rather than fading as the years accumulated. They still worked side by side every day, though they moved a bit slower now and took more breaks in the shade. They still sat together in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the companionship they had built through decades of shared life. They still made each other laugh, still surprised each other with observations or ideas, still looked at each other sometimes with the same wonder they had felt in those early days when everything was new and uncertain. On a warm September evening in 1903, 20 years almost to the day after Quinn had first ridden up to find Willow building gardens from rock, they sat together on the porch Quinn had built several years earlier. It wrapped around two sides of the house now, providing shade and a comfortable place to watch the sunset paint the canyon walls in brilliant colors. The garden stretched out before them, lush and productive, despite the persistent challenges of climate and soil. Sarah was working with a young horse in the corral, her movements patient and sure. Thomas was checking the irrigation system, making minor adjustments with the kind of careful attention to detail that made both his parents proud. "Do you remember what you told me that first day?" Quinn asked, taking Willow's hand in his. Her fingers were still calloused from work, but more bent now with the beginnings of arthritis. He rubbed them gently, trying to ease any discomfort. when I asked how you planned on getting things to grow in this impossible country. I said life finds a way if you let it, Willow replied, smiling at the memory. I was talking about plants, but I suppose it applies to people too. We found our way to each other, and we built something neither of us could have built alone. Best thing I ever did was stop to see what you were doing that day, Quinn said. I was looking for work and a place to settle, but what I found was so much more than that. I found home and purpose and a love I did not even know I was missing. Willow leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower and the first stars began appearing in the darkening sky. Around them, the homestead hummed with the quiet sounds of evening, animals settling down for the night, the wind moving through the leaves of trees they had planted, the distant murmur of the river that had sustained them through 2 decades of hard work and harder choices. We did good, Quinn, Willow said finally. We took barren ground and made it bloom. We raised children who know how to work and how to love and how to see potential where others see only problems. We built something that will last long after we are gone. We did, Quinn agreed. We absolutely did. The years continued their steady march, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. James returned from his studies and began working with the territorial government on water conservation projects, using his mother's pioneering techniques on a larger scale. He married a school teacher named Elizabeth, and they gave Quinn and Willow their first grandchildren, twin girls who visited the homestead every summer and learned about plants and animals and the satisfaction of hard work well done. Sarah married a neighboring rancher named Michael Thompson in 1904, and they combined their operations to create one of the most successful horse breeding programs in the territory. She and Michael built their home just a few miles from the original Callahan homestead, close enough for frequent visits, but far enough for independence. They had 3 children who spent more time at their grandparents' place than their own, drawn by Willow's stories and Quinn's patient teaching. Thomas never married, preferring the quiet satisfaction of working the land. He built his own small house on the homestead property and took over most of the day-to-day operations as Quinn and Willow grew older. He proved to be an excellent farmer and a devoted son, always making sure his parents had everything they needed without making them feel like they were losing their independence. By 1910, Quinn and Willow were both in their early 50s, their bodies showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor, but their minds still sharp and their love for each other undiminished. They had become elder statesmen of sorts in the community, people whom others turned to for advice and wisdom. Young homesteaders still came to learn from Willow about coaxing life from difficult soil. Ranchers still sought Quinn's opinion on water systems and building projects. Arizona finally achieved statehood in 1912, and the Callahan family celebrated, along with the rest of the territory. Quinn had watched the land transform from a wild, barely governed frontier to a real state with laws and infrastructure and growing cities, but the essential character of the place remained unchanged, still demanding strength and determination from those who chose to make their lives here. That same year, Willow's old leg injury, which had bothered her on and off for decades, worsened significantly. She began using a cane for stability, something she resisted at first, but finally accepted when Quinn threatened to carry her everywhere if she did not. Her mobility decreased, but her sharp mind and vast knowledge remained unchanged. She simply adapted, as she had always adapted, finding new ways to contribute and teach without requiring her to move as much as before. Quinn devoted himself to making her comfortable, building her a special chair with proper support for her back and leg, rearranging the house so she could reach everything she needed without excessive movement. He took over more of the physical work of the homestead with Thomas's help, but he always made sure to consult Willow on every decision, valuing her opinion and expertise above all others. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their life together. Sometimes grandchildren would be playing in the yard, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Sometimes it would be just the two of them, alone with their memories and their enduring love for each other. I have been thinking about that first morning when you rode up, Willow said one evening in the spring of 1915. They were both in their mid-50s now, their hair liberally streaked with gray, their faces deeply lined by sun and wind and time. I was so certain I did not need anyone that I could do everything myself through sheer determination and careful planning. You probably could have, Quinn said honestly. You are the most capable person I have ever met, Willow. Maybe, she conceded, but I would have been lonely, and I would have missed out on the best parts of this life. The partnership, the children, the grandchildren, the shared triumphs and shared struggles. You taught me that asking for help is not the same as being weak and that building something together is better than building it alone. You taught me that home is not something you find, but something you create, Quinn replied. You taught me that life finds a way if you let it, whether that is plants growing in impossible conditions or a drifter finally finding a place to put down roots. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching as the sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. The garden stretched before them, lush with late spring growth, a testament to decades of careful work and patient tending. In the distance, they could hear Thomas talking to the animals as he finished evening chores, and closer by, the sound of Sarah's children playing some elaborate game that involved much running and shrieking. No regrets? Willow asked, a question she had asked many times over the years. Not a single one, Quinn answered, as he always did. Every choice I made since that September morning brought me here, to this moment with you. How could I regret anything that led to this? As twilight deepened into night, Quinn helped Willow inside and made sure she was comfortable before banking the fire and closing up the house for the night. They lay together in the bed they had shared for over 2 decades, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long familiarity. And Quinn listened to Willow's breathing slow and deepen as she fell asleep. He stayed awake a while longer, thinking about the incredible journey his life had taken from that dusty road where he had first seen a stubborn woman building gardens from stone. He thought about how close he had come to riding past, too focused on his own problems to stop and investigate. He thought about all the moments, large and small, that had brought them to this place of deep contentment and shared purpose. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. There were funerals to attend as old friends and neighbors passed away, and births to celebrate as the family continued to grow. Quinn and Willow became great-grandparents in 1920 when James's oldest daughter had twins of her own, and they marveled at how their family had expanded from just the two of them to this sprawling network of children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them connected by love and shared values. In 1925, on a warm evening much like the one when they had first met, Willow suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed. Quinn refused to leave her side, sleeping in a chair next to her bed and tending to her needs with the same patient devotion he had always shown. The family rallied around them, children and grandchildren taking turns helping with her care and the running of the homestead. Willow recovered partially over the following months, regaining some movement and most of her speech, though she would never be as mobile as she once was. She handled the change with her typical pragmatism, focusing on what she could still do rather than mourning what she had lost. She taught her grandchildren and great-grandchildren from her chair, sharing stories and wisdom accumulated over more than 6 decades of life. Quinn stayed by her side constantly, reading to her, talking with her, simply being present in the way that mattered most. They had built their life together word by word, touch by touch, shared moment by shared moment. And he was not about to stop now just because the days were growing shorter and the future was limited. On a crisp morning in November of 1927, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows and family gathered around, Willow Callahan passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 67 years old and had lived a full, rich life that had touched countless people. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, people coming from all over Arizona and beyond to pay respects to the woman who had taught them that life finds a way if you let it, that impossible dreams are only impossible if you do not try. Quinn stood at her graveside, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and felt the weight of her loss settle into his bones. But even in his grief, he felt gratitude for the 44 years they had shared, for every conversation and every sunrise and every moment of companionship and love. She had made him better than he would have been alone, and her influence would continue through all the lives she had touched. He lived another 3 years after Willow's death, years spent on the homestead, surrounded by family, watching the garden continue to bloom and produce under Thomas's careful tending. He spent long hours on the porch, often with a grandchild or great-grandchild beside him, telling stories about their grandmother and all she had accomplished. He made sure they understood that she had not been a saint or superhuman, just a determined woman who refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. Quinn Callahan died on a September morning in 1930, almost exactly 47 years after he had first ridden up to find Willow building gardens from stone. He was 73 years old, and he passed peacefully in his sleep, his body simply deciding it had worked hard enough and earned its rest. His children buried him next to Willow in the small cemetery outside Clifton, their graves marked with simple headstones that gave their names and dates and the words they had lived by. Life finds a way if you let it. The homestead remained in the Callahan family for generations, each new generation learning the lessons Quinn and Willow had taught about hard work, determination, and the power of building something together. The garden continued to flourish, expanded and improved over the decades, but still rooted in the principles Willow had established. The water collection system Quinn had built was maintained and upgraded, serving as the backbone of the homestead's irrigation for over a century. In time, as Arizona continued to grow and develop, the Callahan homestead became a historical landmark, preserved as an example of early homesteading techniques and sustainable agriculture. Students came to study Willow's innovative methods. Historians came to document the story of how one determined woman and one wandering cowboy had built something lasting from rocks and faith and love. But for those who truly understood, the most important thing about the Callahan homestead was not the techniques or the historical significance. It was the love story that had begun on a dusty September morning in 1883, when a wandering cowboy had stopped to watch a stubborn woman building gardens from stone, and she had looked up at him with storm-gray eyes and spoken words that would define both their lives. Life finds a way if you let it. They had let it, both of them, opening themselves to possibility when it would have been easier to remain closed. They had taken hard ground and made it bloom, not just with plants, but with family and purpose and a love that lasted until death and beyond. They had proved that home is not a place you find, but something you build, stone by stone, day by day, with someone who shares your vision and your willingness to work for it. And in the end, that was the real miracle, not the gardens growing in impossible soil or the water captured from sparse rains, but the simple, profound truth that two people who had been drifting separately had found each other and built something beautiful that would last for generations. They had found a way, just as Willow had promised, and in doing so, they had created a legacy that went far beyond the boundaries of 160 acres of rocky Arizona land.